And I guess I'll quickly defer to one of the mics on what's been happening and what activities we have ongoing.
I suppose I could give a quick overview of what happened the last few weeks. I on the CodeQL side, a number of people have uh, reached out to me that are interested and willing to help. I've think I've gotten back to everyone. The main area that I'm looking for help right now in is enabling new queries and writing custom queries, depending on what your interests are there. Um, for the, I think I talked to one person in particular that was interested in perhaps writing some queries. We've run into a few cases in the code as we've gone through and fixed some CodeQL alerts. There's things like the most common issue that you'll run into is people. This is a well-known problem in the code base, but um, people asserting on null checks, right, and not returning from a function if something returns null. So they'll say assert does not equal null, and then the next line they'll dereference it. It's obviously bad if you don't have asserts turned on or on a build that ignores asserts and things like that. You'll dereference a null pointer.
You mean like that one that I found on Friday?
Yes, probably. Where was that at?
Go check the patch. It's a nasty one. It's in Capsule.
Okay. Yeah, so you'll run into those. Now, there are some legit cases where we do that in the code. So as you turn on CodeQL and you go through these alerts, what you'll find is that there are functions like append device path or something like that, um, that depend on having a null pointer. We write them all the time, right? We just put optional on the function parameter. CodeQL does not understand that. So there are improvements I think that can be made, like perhaps we could see if a parameter is marked optional and not flag that parameter. That would probably get us to the point that we have a lot more legit issues being reported, because if we truly are expecting something to be null, it should be marked optional. And if it is marked optional, we should expect it, or if it's not marked optional, we should expect it to not be null. Um, so there's things like that that I think we could write queries for that would improve some things for the way that patterns that we use to write code. The other side of it is just enabling new queries. So I will, after this meeting, put up the official patch to enable CodeQL. Once that happens, I'm going to have a line in it that disables the default queries. So one of the other things that people could look at if they're interested is just removing that line and turning on a query that you find useful. We do one query at a time. So if you find one and you run it, find a few issues, fix them, and then you want to turn that query on, that's a useful set of work for us to get done in turning on more queries. I know Eric on the call reached out, and I see that you have your hand up about that. Go ahead.
Been working through I think the first one listed in your open request for comment is the conditionally uninitialized variables. Do we want to track who's picked up which of those? Since we definitely don't want to duplicate work there.
Yeah. I guess Mike, I could file this under, like, would it be under tools or in Bugzilla?
Are you talking about the actual code, the not duplicating effort on the actual code fixes?
Yeah, like I think we just want to be able to track who's working on what query.
Yeah, I think Michael keeps saying new queries, but you mean as existing queries, we want to enable those, right? And so we have to go fix the bugs in order to put those into the PR gate.
Yeah. Well, new for our code base.
Yeah, new for our code base, but existing in CodeQL's query options. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we just want to be able to track who's enabling what. So like you said, we don't duplicate the effort. Bugzilla is the way we normally would do that.
Yeah, that's one way. I'd leave it to you, Michael. It sounds like you've got some volunteers, which is great because I redirected all the people that had shown interest in Coverity, Open Coverity, to you. Hopefully, you didn't get spammed too much with volunteers, but that's actually good. I would leave it to you to figure out how to coordinate amongst those volunteers who works on which queries, whether or not they team up on one or whether or not they enable ones separately so they're not colliding with each other, something like that. I don't know, but I'd leave it to you. And if you want to use Bugzilla, that's great. If you want to use some other method to coordinate activities, because it sounds like it's a very dynamic set of activities to get all of this going.
Okay, sounds good. So we'll talk, Eric, about that, and we'll track it. And as far as the work being done, is EDK2 staging okay for us to put query enabling branches, or would you prefer them to stay on people's personal forks of EDK2?
Well, the BKM there is, if you're just working by yourself, there's nothing wrong with using your own, your own fork of the EDK2 repo and a branch there with the set of changes. The reason to use EDK2 staging is if there's multiple developers that want to collaborate on a feature or set of changes, and they all want write access so they can, be doing updates to the branch without having to give each other permission to their own personal forks. That's the reason to use staging. So I think it depends on how you break up the work and what level of collaboration is required.
Okay, then as I'm working with people, if we get on a particularly tough query, that might be something that we do a staging branch for and share between each other. But for these initial ones where I'm recommending we do relatively simple queries, perhaps we'll just have people stick to their forks and do the PRs in from there as the work gets done.
Yeah, sounds good. And I think, as I suggested before, let's start with some queries that don't have a large number of issues, so that we can kind of get the ball rolling and everybody can get used to the process,
Right.
and leave the more complicated ones as far as total number of code changes to a little bit later after everybody gets up to speed.
Sounds good. Yeah, and I am working with people offline on that, so we'll continue doing that where needed. And if any of our items become big enough that we need others involved, I'll definitely use something like EDK2 discussions to raise those topics. But the other thing we talked about was, there was a bug for enabling Clang and CI. Not really a bug, just a request that Nate formally filed. I think we've talked about it a few times before. Did we have thoughts on that? I thought technically everything was in place now for us to turn Clang on.
I think the issue with Clang, and this gets back to one of the first topics we were talking about here, which was, which I'm negligent on, was driving ownership of the toolchain. I think Clang has a lot of restrictions right now. There's Clang on Linux, Clang on Windows. They're very different and they support very different things. And so we needed to get some consistency there. I think the things that we've prototyped in the past was the Clang PDB toolchain, which is Clang on Windows, and it can't be enabled for all packages, but there was a pretty decent subset that could be.
Okay. Yeah, there was a work item filed for that. We also kind of resurfaced the XUnit Google test discussion. I think we kind of left that a bit open-ended a few months ago. Probably Nate or Mike might have an update on that one.
So at least on the LLVM one or the Clang one, we've actually been able to use the vanilla binaries for Windows off of lvm.org, and they actually compile PDK2
You know,
pretty much the same.
which toolchain tag, Nate?
I think we have like a custom Clang one, Mike.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that relates to Sean's comment that there's like various levels of the ones that are in the open source today of support. So maybe the first step is to get you know, the official
tool stuff
one
added,
in
yeah.
there and
Yep.
support it as a toolchain tag, and then you can update the Bugzilla to say you want that toolchain tag enabled with LLVM 11.0 as the actual compiler behind it.
Yeah.
If I recall, Brandon, correct me if I'm wrong. Y'all were using Clang PDB, right? But we're unable to use the standard flavor of Clang or the OVMF build. I think there's still
I don't
people out
actually
there using
Yeah.
Clang PDB.
Yeah, I wasn't really aware there was a difference. But yeah, I guess we use Clang PDB.
But as I understand, though, Clang PDB compiles differently. It doesn't produce ELF type images, right? Which
Right.
is what the standard Clang will produce.
Actually, the vanilla Clang produces PECOF starting with 11.0. So that's why we opted
Oh.
for 11.0. Is they actually added support for emitting PECOF to the vanilla linker that comes with. Now, it doesn't have the symbol format of Visual Studio like the Clang PDB does, but the actual binaries that come out are PECOF natively.
So then it should be possible to switch from PDB to Clang 11. Okay.
So Nate, I think the ask is that we first need to get that as a supported toolchain and find the owner that's going to maintain it. And once that's done and we understand what it will build against, we can turn it on in CI. I guess I would give you a heads up that I think we'd like to, especially if you're going to build on Linux, we'd like to move that to a container and do it in the containers. I think the container work is getting very close to landing, and I think that will make all this conversation much simpler in that the tools, versions, and definitions will all be contained within the container Docker file. So that should make all of this much more consistent.
Yeah. Table that on the containers. I was trying to use those today. I was not having much luck. So
Okay. Yeah, I think there's a few rough edges, and I think there's definitely documentation that's needed. But again, I think that's where I'd like to see the investment go, because it will make these conversations much easier.
yeah, I agree. Definitely having it in the CI and common definition would be good.
I don't know. Yeah, I agree with the containers in general, but I also think just running Clang builds on Windows seems like a potentially valuable activity. I mean, they should come out identical for both, though, because it is literally the same linker toolchain used on each. It's just, yeah, I guess we'll have to think about what the risk is that, you know, the exact same C code run on one OS versus another being different output. I guess it's probably really low, right?
But we can run Windows Docker containers too. Or
That would fix it too.
there's an existing a Visual Studio 2020 container, so it seems reasonable that we could support Clang as well in a Windows container.
That sounds like a good plan to me.
Do you have any? I mean, I think this is a tangent, but it's a question around anytime we'd want to pick up a toolchain. Do you have any metrics on how that does for size, optimization, speed, all those kind of fun things that you know, would be useful in discussions of any new tool chain.
So I don't have a formal roll-up for you, Sean, but the person who was working on enabling Clang told me that it's actually better. Like the size is smaller.
Okay. Cool.
Then GCC or then the Visual Studio compiler.
Then both GCC and Visual Studio actually.
I would expect most things to have a smaller compiled size than the Visual Studio compiler, but
Yeah, it's supposedly like by far the best tool chain that he tested.
so I'm not. If I remember, I saw some metrics in the past that indicated that Clang is slightly slower to compile than Link, so there is a trade-off there. I don't think most people will notice. Someone out there was doing some pretty significant tracking of different programs that they were comparing between GCC and Clang. So
Yeah,
maybe
I'm not sure, but I believe kind of the magic was they got LTO working with the PECOF backend, and that was kind of the thing that really made the binary size crunch down really well. That starting with Clang 11.
Right, that was the same transition we needed to see on the GCC tool chains for GCC to get close to the Visual Studio, because Visual Studio had the lead on size for a long time until the LTO feature was available for our use case on GCC. So it sounds like that's the same thing for Clang. Once you get LTO available, they all get pretty close.
Yeah, for a very long time, they only did LTO with the ELF output, but just recently it works with PECOF now too, and that's what, made it viable.
Yep.
All right, Michael, you want to keep going?
Yeah, there was the Google test stuff, right? That we were talking about. I think Mike, you mentioned that was targeting like end of November, if I remember right, to get like
Yeah,
the initial support.
right. I'm wanting to do just that, as I think it was suggested in this meeting, that we add Google Test without the mocking support as a first step to get that in, because it has some value on its own for specific use cases. And then we can work on adding the mocking support. And I've got some developers that have done some evaluation of some ways to pull in the Gmock in a reasonable way for C code. But I've got to go evaluate that some more. But I'll start, before I dive into that, I'll start with the Google Test patch review. I actually got a bug report against it about a week ago and fixed an issue. So I think it's actually ready now for the community review, because I at least got a few use cases of Google Test going to verify that it works.
I think there was the OpenSSL stuff that came up as a topic as well. You're writing like documentation and things like that. I know someone on our side was interested in that documentation because they were running into similar problems as you, and they wanted to help like clarify and document it a little better as well.
That's great. The patch review was out, the V2 version of it last week with that full README, and it got committed last night, so it's merged now into master. So definitely ask them to take a look at the README, and if they have more content they want to add or clarifications, absolutely go produce a patch series or a patch against the README. The other thing that was fixed was the fact that the Perl scripts that are rarely used, we use them when we move to a new version of OpenSSL and we need to regenerate the OpenSSL INF files for a new release of OpenSSL. The Perl scripts have also been updated. Ely did a great job of pulling that together. So this same patch series that went in has that updated, because the addition of both the ecliptic curve features and the optimized algorithms for some of the hashing functions required more INF files. So, and those were not folded into our CI. So the CI now covers all the combinations, and the Perl scripts can generate all the INFs correctly. So we think it's a new good point on the crypto package now, with a little bit simpler configuration than where it was headed. That was the main incentive, was things were getting kind of out of getting really complicated to configure the libraries and the PCDs. So we think we got that narrowed down a little bit simpler. There's still more to go. And the clear documentation and the full enablement of all the different combinations in CI, so that if there's a commit that breaks one of those, we're going to catch them immediately, as opposed to being letting things get through without the checks and only break in downstream use cases, which would be bad.
Yeah, sounds good. I took a look at the document. I haven't read it all the way, but it looked good for summarizing things. See if there's anything else. I think the only other thing that I remember was last week we kind of talked about SBOM a bit. And I think Martin wanted to share more in this meeting about that.
Yeah, do we have him on the agenda for future week yet?
So I
don't-
do have the email. I'll reach out to him and see when he wants to join.
Okay. The other topic that jumps to my mind is we've talked about the code coverage for unit testing, and there's a patch series, or a couple patch series, that went out at the end of September. And those need to be reviewed. Some of them are, I think, some of the plugin work that I think maybe somebody on your team, Sean, had started, and then they took and got updated for the latest in EDK2, along with the OpenCPP coverage for Windows Visual Studio, as well as the LCUB GCUB, and both the CI use case and the developer use case. So I'm wondering if we're going to get some time to review those complete set of changes, to see if we can get those added in quickly.
Okay, yeah, let me do that. I thought those got merged, because I thought actually I already gave my review, but
I did not see those.
okay, I'll go look. All right, so other topics?
Yeah, actually, when you mentioned the containers earlier, was trying to use the two containers that are out there for Windows and Linux earlier today, and was curious why the Linux containers were configured the way they were. Specifically, the Ubuntu one has these setup scripts that seem to require you to be on Linux or within, some. They didn't work for me on Windows. I couldn't figure out how to get them working. Maybe it was a documentation issue. And then the Windows one only works if you're on Windows 11, I think. I couldn't get it working until I downgraded the server core version back to 2019. So wondering if we should support some older versions of the Windows container for those of us who don't have Windows 11 yet, and hoping we can address some of those difficulties around the Ubuntu container.
So I think the easiest path there is to just file issues in the container repo. I know Oliver and Chris have been using that. And then I think the Ubuntu container was submitted by someone else.
It looked like
Um,
someone at NVIDIA, maybe, yeah.
And so I'm not 100% sure of the use case for it. And if that's the case, we probably should make sure the documentation is up to, what we hope for it. I don't see a README in there, and I think it might be wise for us to have a README in each of the containers to
Yeah.
give some overview of expectations. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not, but the thing is, like, I guess we'd have to go talk to whoever created the Ubuntu one, because I'm not really sure what their intent was with the entry points. But I was able to build that one once I removed the entry points and made like 1 or 2 small configuration changes, and it's been working fine for me. So everything else seems to be configured right. It's just the confusion around that entry point. So,
Okay.
do you know who did you say was responsible? Could you put those names in the chat?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. If you look at the project, you'll see there's only been, I think, 4 contributors.
Mhm.
And one of them is Mickey, who set up the repo. So those are the 4 people you'd want to talk to, or 3
Okay.
people.
Yeah, okay, I see Mickey, and then Oliver, Chris, and Jake. Okay.
We can also turn on discussions in this container repo if we want to, So again, you can file issues. I think they've definitely been using issues for anything you have, and I think it's okay to do a question there too. But we also can turn on the discussion for this repo if that would be helpful.
Yeah, sure. I think we can do it either way, but the owners of the primary contributors to that repository feel like discussions are nice because they don't come across as pressing.
Right.
Yeah, if you look at the commit history in the Ubuntu directory, it's from Jay Garver, is the developer, and their commit message describes it as a dev image intended for direct use by a developer.
Yeah, but the odd thing about it is the way I think it's written in a way that couples it to a Linux host. And so if you're trying to run the container on Windows, it doesn't work.
Gotcha.
So I guess
Yeah,
I'll file that as a discussion issue when you'll open discussions.
Right, and I agree with Sean. READMEs in each one of these containers, which summarizes the intended use case, because I think we've thought of 2 so far. One is for our CI agents, and our CI agents, the majority of them run under Azure pipelines. So specifically, a configuration that's compatible with being dispatched in that environment. And then the second use case is by developers. And as you're pointing out, some of our developers are Windows-based, some of them are Linux-based, some of them are Mac-based. What's the compatibility of the containers for developers, or is it even intended to be used by a developer if it's been, customized for that CI use case?
Yep, sounds good. Well, we should definitely have that info. Yep.
Okay. Discussions have been opened there, and I have a issue open for the adding the documentation to each container.
That was fast. Cool.
All right. Any other opens?
Let's
I
see.
think
I had one that I think I'd sent you some questions, Sean, about the plugin for running host-based unit tests. And, the idea of supporting multiple DSC files or multiple instances of the host unit test in the YAML file.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you have a preference and direction for those 2, because I do think that for large packages that may be maintained by multiple developers or groups, the idea that they may want to maintain separate DSCs for subsets of the testing within that package is a reasonable way to break up the work.
I mean, right, the unit test DSC is basically for CI to say that, we don't break anything, right? We don't have regressions.
Yep.
And in that context, I would think that a single DSC would be acceptable and probably desired.
Right. And then
Um,
I ran into another issue that caused me to split into multiple DSC files, and that had to do with if you're trying to write a unit test against a kind of a library class, and you want to be able to run the set of test vectors against different instances of that library, then you want to be able to specify a different library instance to link against for building the host-based unit test. And so the other feature that may be missing here that had caused me to go down, one reason to go down the multiple DSC path was our host, when we have the INF for a host application, and we want to then do like the file GUID override, so I can list the unit test unit test INF more than once with a different set of library mappings. The file GUID override doesn't work for host application. And maybe that's the right fix for that specific use case, is to go fix that issue in base tools.
yeah, I think that makes sense.
I just don't know how when you have the GUID added to the name, I just don't know how much that's going to break other things about PyTools assumptions about the naming convention for finding the test to run and collecting results.
Yeah, I think we published the heuristic or the grep pattern we use, but I think you might be right in that I think we do expect it to end with, something like testapp.exe on Windows and just test app. Which I think, as you call out, the GUID will be appended to the end. I guess if you can put together, like, I'm assuming you must have a use case here that's
Yeah,
exposing these problems.
OpenSSL, there's 5 instances of the OpenSSL lib now. So
Right. So I don't know if you can put that up into PR and we can see where it breaks and see the results. And at that point, we can get someone to pull down the branch and see if we can provide any ideas for about a path forward going forward.
okay. Yeah, I can't even get it to build with 2 INFs with different GUIDs right now. So I'll have to go get the base tools change done as part of that PR as well. So I'll work with the base tools owners. I'll reach out to Christine's online here. I'll reach out to Bob as well on that one and see if we can't figure out why that breaks. And then if we can get that so it'll actually even build, then we can see if it'll run the tests or not. And if there's test execution issues, I can point you at the PR.
Yep, makes sense.
Looks like Miki joined. We were talking about the containers just before.
Yeah, I still think, I mean, you're more than welcome to chime in, but I think they just set up the repo. So it really is Chris Oliver and that third.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Jake Carver. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I think we needed to have like a few topics on EDK2 base tools. I don't know if we want to do that today or we want others in the meeting on a different day.
Related to the Python project?
Yes.
I didn't see Joey on here today. I mean, Christine's here, so I don't know what was the exact topics you wanted to bring up.
Well, I just wanted to bring up the fact that I think there's like some process improvements that we probably need to make to be able to integrate it a little easier. For one, the PyTool extensions PyPy page hasn't been updated in several years, and it has like Matt's test branch still listed on it. And so it's not super useful and it's rather stale. Secondly, the release process is not super clear. I think there were like 5 releases that happened on one day, and it seems like there's a release for every change, but at the same time, there's like not an obvious stable version to use. Whenever I used the latest version a week or two ago, it didn't work. It had like a Python error trying to import some module that wasn't available. I think I saw a fix from Bob up in PR on the repo, but either it shouldn't have been released or we should have had like a formal release that was tested before it went out. There's also no integration testing in the repo. I think there's just a few, as far as I can tell, unit tests being run. If we're going to integrate this into pretty complex projects, I think we need to improve the level of testing that's done in the repo. There are other topics, but those are the starters, I guess.
So I can add real brief, yeah, I think all the documentation and readmes are out of date, and so I think any directions there are probably invalid. I think I did ask Joey to see what he could do to clean that up, so hopefully there's some changes coming. As far as integration testing and making stronger PR gates, I think again Joey's been working on that and has some changes ready. I think it does require some EDK2 updates because the core CI does use the pip module if installed, but the platform CIs for the ARMvert, the embed or the emulator package and OVMF do not use them. So I think he's got some patches out on the mailing list for those.
Yeah, that was another problem that led to like inconsistent results, right? Depending on whether you're doing a platform build or a CI build.
And then the third thing around the releases is, so that was a direct ask from someone previously that every commit be published into a release, and the reason being is that would give you somewhat the similar ability to bisect as you could if it was source checked into the repo.
Yeah, I'd be fine with that if there was like more comprehensive integration testing that was done. Without that, it's kind of like you're just pulling things out of the dark.
Right. I mean, I think what that means in the current state, Michael, is that the pip requirements and like the root of the EDK repo, is pointing at an older one. The base tools repo was moving forward on its pip releases, but it's requires some manual testing now to see if that latest version is stable and doesn't have any issues with compatibility with the EDK2 repo or EDK2 platforms or other places. And once that manual verification occurs, then we can update pip requirements in places too that may skip over maybe a couple unstable ones, right? So that is a bit odd to be publishing to pip, effectively not fully tested, versions.
Yeah, I guess what I'm looking for is just some differentiator that says this release was tested and the other releases weren't. Like we have a bit of a dependency inversion if we're saying that we have to go look at the EDK2 project pip file to figure that out. Like the project producing the release should be able to self-describe the quality of its release.
Right. And I think the work item that Sean mentioned is the key, which is RCI testing is insufficient right now for that. And I think if we beef up the CI testing on the base tools Python project, then every release will meet that quality criteria that we're currently testing for manually.
Yeah. I think I agree with that, and I think that's fine. But the thing to keep in mind is every time something goes to pip, in my mind, it should be externally consumable ready. Otherwise, it shouldn't be put on pip. Because there are automated tools like Dependabot that will pull people's dependencies and update them and things like that. And you're kind of just spamming all that stuff if you're releasing things that are not release quality.
All right. Yeah, I definitely open an issue on that because I think that's a different release process than we currently have. I think what you're suggesting is that, many PRs can go in without creating a release, and there has to be an active, generate release, decision made by the base tools owners.
Yeah.
So Michael, I mean, that's what we do on PyTools, and I agree with you. I think that is a better path. I think this was maybe a short-term plan to just mimic the behavior as much as possible, as the code was when it was in the code tree.
Yep. Okay.
But I agree. I think ultimately, especially if we get to a point, well, now that we've integrated or that we have plans for the integration tests, we can do that. And I agree that it makes a lot more sense to be releasing stable builds rather than every build.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to like building every build and storing it somewhere as an artifact. I just don't think it should go out on the external pip channel unless it's been validated or tested to some extent.
Yep.
So then, how frequently would the primary like BDK2 repo pick up the base tools? Would it only pick up official releases, or real releases, or would you want to continuously integrate that?
I think what we've kind of said in the past was, again, trying to mimic the old behavior, which is if you had a code change that needed a tools change, right? Those all come together as a patch series, right? So you get the code change into the project, and then you go and you update the pip requirements as part of your patch series to enable the feature. And so we were trying to mimic the behavior from the past as much as possible. I think once the quality of the base tools and really the base tools test and validation quality goes up, I think it makes a lot more sense to move to a model where you make official releases and you add features to the base tools and you track base tools as its own project with its own, lifetime and release process. I still think that release process would be driven by need, not by a time-based schedule, though.
Sure. I think
Yeah,
as
there's got
Michael,
to be a feature or a critical bug fix to move everybody forward.
Right.
yeah, I think as I guess the problem is that validation process. What is it, right? Sure, if you have tons of semi component testing and unit testing, then we should be pretty confident. But you don't really know if it's working till you at least use it with OVMF, right?
Well, we
So-
have some prior art there, I think. At least I'm sure other places do, but at the minimum, PyTool Extensions has some integration testing where it pulls different projects and then it integrates the Python code under test with those projects and checks the results. And I think it has like some robot tests and other things to automatically, see whether there was any major regressions or not.
Okay, yeah, that sounds fine to me.
Yeah, I think it should definitely be automated because that has all the benefits of obviously reducing effort and improving consistency, etc. But I understand that there's work to do. I just wanted to mention that hopefully we can. I don't really know what to say in the short term. Hopefully we can like test things, I guess, before they're released, because it's kind of hard to get random updates thrown at you all the time and know which one to use or not use.
So, Eric, I just added a link for the PR54 in that project. That is the one to enable integration tests. I guess we need to go track down who's on point to approve the PRs in EDK2 for the OVMF ARM vert and emulator package, because it's claimed that that's what it's waiting on. But I think once those are in and this PR goes in, then I think the quality of testing as every check-in goes into the base tools will go up, because it will have to build all of the packages in EDK2, including the platforms. Christine, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I will check about this pull request and think with Bob.
Any other topics for today?
So I just wanted to maybe bring up again, at some point we should probably look at least trying to do CI for a subset of EDK2 platforms. And I guess what's maybe a good way of, at least getting started on that?
You mean like physical hardware or?
Well, at least we can start with trying to compile, right? I mean, even if we can't, do a boot test, compiling is better than, nothing.
So there's two categories here. So are you referring to just the platforms in the EDK2 platforms repository, or that and potentially physical platforms that some of our community members may have that they want some images deployed to?
So I think we should just start with what we have in EDK2 platforms.
Okay.
If we want to do more, I'm not at all opposed to it. It's just I feel like we should start small, crawl, walk, run.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I agree with you. I think that's the right place to start. The second one requires us to define an interface to a remote job dispatch from Azure Pipelines or GitHub Actions, or whichever one makes the makes the most sense to do that. But for the EDK2 platforms ones, I agree that doing build CI, which we don't have today, would be a good first step on there.
So
Yeah.
I guess, Nate, a question to you is, probably the easiest, well, one of the easiest ways that I see going forward to do that would be to leverage Stuart to build those. I think over the last couple of years, there's been some effort or there's been some prototype branches that built some of the Intel platforms using Stuart. There's been, I think, a branch out there that did some of the ARM platforms and maybe even the Raspberry Pi. But those haven't really stuck, and I think no one ran with those prototype build changes. And I think that would make it easiest to plug into our existing CI system and get all the benefits of our existing CI system. But I think really what we've been looking for is the maintainers to be willing to do that and to be willing to own all of the code cleanup that will be needed to come into compliance with our CI system.
So Sean, we looked at the Stuart work you guys did. We found it didn't work for us. And we actually sent you a few. We actually sent you a few pull requests to try to make it.
You feel like.
Sorry. We actually sent you a few pull requests to try to make it work better for us, and they all got rejected. So as far as I'm aware, I don't believe that's really changed. So all I can really say is that right now, the way things stand don't work for us, and we're just going to keep doing what we're doing.
So this sounds like a great technical deep dive between a few of us, Nate, to go bottom out on all of that. I know Bob did a lot of the evaluation of that before, where that source of those PRs came from. And so I think it's in the light of trying to get EDK2 platforms enabled quickly. We need to figure out how to see if those reasons for rejecting or an alternate way of solving that problem to get PyTools as the way to go and the Stewart commands to go build the EDK2 platforms.
Oh, so that's not
before-
quick, Mike. That's not quick. Quick would be just running the script we have.
True. But that'll
So,
will help if
that's-
for things like unit testing and all the other CI checks that we get for free.
So
Right.
sure, but that's not just step one. Step one is let's compile.
Well, so I guess my point, Nate, right? Like one of the challenges is the Stewart stuff has been integrated into the server with all the log collection, all the steps, like all that kind of stuff, you know, setting up, having permissions to access resources, all those kind of things built in. And I think that's valuable and is super easy to then roll into CI. And that's kind of what we've been trying to push. I think if you look at, you can go look here at Bob's PRs and you'll see that they have comments in them. And we did have a number of conversations around alternate ways to do something or redefining that problem. I don't think we got to the bottom of that. So I would look forward to a conversation around really trying to understand the problem and how we can get, you know, PyTools to work for those projects.
Right. And I know one of the
So
fundamental things, Sean,
that's
was
fair, but I still think it's a separate conversation from let's just get CI running on something. Like something is better than nothing. And it's honestly not that hard to run our build. It's really one command.
and all the tool installations that have to occur in front of that.
Which are the same as the ones for EDK2 anyway. So
that
your container
Stewart
should
does
have that.
But that's where Stewart helps us. It does that for us with their external dependencies.
Okay, so we run that part of Stewart and then we run our build and then it's done, right?
Just run the Stewart update. Yeah.
But I don't think it would be that hard to hook in. Because Stewart has the concept of platform specific build logic, which I think is largely what the script is that you have now. It has a build plugin, right, or a compile plugin that would be used in CI to go compile things and stuff like that. But I don't, from what I remember of like a lot of the Intel platform code on EDK2 platforms, I don't really see the gap being that big to be able to get it to fit into the Stewart stuff. I
At
think
the
maybe
very
we just have to
least-
look at it a bit deeper.
But at the very least, Michael, right? They could just have Stewart called the existing script, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the benefit that we keep going over that Stewart gives us is it handles a lot of dependencies through the different ways that it pulls things like the NuGet packages that we use, and also handling like we don't have sub modules here, I guess, but it helps with those plugins as well, right? We have a lot of those plugins that get auto discovered, and they generally just work across most packages for checking things like markdown lint, spell check. We have the uncrustify one, etc. And so a lot of those bring us to like just getting those tools to run consistently. I do think that at a high level, we as a community have to look at how do we do CI. And in my opinion, like if we're doing something that doesn't work, we should just fix it rather than do different solutions. Like I think we should just have a Tiano core CI solution, whatever that is.
But still, I think there is some merit to quote, just getting it working, right? That definitely don't want to try and do all of it at once.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you consider the tool chain for us is going to be vastly different than the tool chain for some ARM port, or the tool chain for an Intel platform, I should say.
I think a lot of that's handled though. I mean, we build lots of Intel code using Stewart internally.
Oh, I'm sure. It's just
and
I don't know what the toolchain requirements are for everything else out there on EDK2 platforms. Like there's a bunch of stuff from other vendors, right?
Yeah, I mean that's an open BZ just by itself.
Yes. Yeah.
Well,
So
in the way that's starting with one, Nate, what would be the one platform you'd start with?
well, it's a good question, Mike. There's kind of two ways I could see it going. Either we do something like the Whitley Min platform, which got a lot of attention, but we'd only be able to do compiles. We wouldn't be able to do boots really at all. Or we could do something like the Symix package, which even if we're only doing compiles first, at least it's really easy to enable boot tests on that, right? At least at some future point, because there's no special hardware requirements.
Yeah, but as far as just, if we're going to do build only as a first step, and we're obviously the purpose of CI is to catch issues, which one do you think could give you the most bang for the buck value? Because that's how we'll figure out how to start first, with just a build.
With just compiles, I'd probably say Tiger and Whitley.
Okay.
And maybe Sapphire, because that should be coming really soon, as well as Alder.
Okay. Well, let's start with just one of those and see what it takes. And then if we run into major roadblocks with trying to do the Stewart based of just the compile of one of those, then we'll rethink this. But I think that's the right thing to start with and go solve the issue as Michael suggested. And see how quickly we can get that one platform going. Once you get one and you've got the template, it should be easy to add more, right?
Yeah, as far as building, Whitley's probably the hardest one. So
okay,
maybe start with that one.
Okay.
Yeah, now, Nathan, for the Alder, that has a bunch of bat scripts in it, does it not? Like that are kind of chained together through environment variables, at least for the Windows build.
For the closed source, yes. For the open source, we have buildbios.py, and that works for everything.
Okay, gotcha. Because I remember Alder Lake, or at least the Royal Park releases, were always difficult to conceive switching to Stewart because of the way all the bat scripts were coupled.
Yeah, I mean, buildbios.py is really just kind of a Python conversion of prep and build.
Gotcha. Okay. It seems like switching to Stewart wouldn't be that bad then, right?
I honestly don't know, but I do know that we looked at it and we had some issues. We filed some PRs asking for it to, change to make it work for us, and we ran into some resistance, and we basically just gave up and said screw it.
Okay. Well, then I guess maybe this is an opportunity then, right? If we have people here saying we want to do Stewart, and then other people saying that.
Well, we
there are
don't
things
really
that
want
need
to
to
do.
change.
We don't really want to do Stewart. We just
Well, you'd at
looked
least
into
like
what
to
it would be.
able to use it, right?
Yep.
So maybe we should revisit those issues or those change requests.
So Nate, I also put a link into groups.io files, which you'll see from, I forget what year and month, I think it was 2020. Jeremiah presented OpenKBL and the conversion effort there. I also put in a link to his branch that he did for that. So that might be a place to get started if you're interested in and willing to look at that. I'm assuming that, the world has moved on since 2020 a little bit, but I'm sure it's still a good starting point.
Yeah, I remember looking at that a few years ago. I remember we just kind of looked, and then we had some feedback, and then it never really went anywhere, if I remember correctly. But it's been years at this point, so.
Yep. So I think Mike, either we can take this offline and have another meeting, or we can just table it for next week's meeting. But I think we need some more details of the problems that were encountered.
Right. So, and I think Bob was looking at it from a much wider scope of platform targets. Let's focus on getting a couple out of EDK2 platforms and understand the specific issues for those, and we'll incrementally, figure out how to get Stuart to support our Tiano core use cases.
But in the meantime, suppose is it okay then if Nathan proceeds with the not using Stewart, or
I think we need to try to use Stewart.
okay?
Like I said, I look at it as like, if we can't use Stewart to enable these open source platforms, then we need to like revisit the way it's designed, or we need to understand better how to do it right. Like, I don't think we should be using Stewart in EDK2 and say that we're unable to use it in EDK2 platforms.
I meant more as a
I in my
stopgap measure, though. That was what I was saying.
Yeah, I mean, I know that we can use Stewart. It's just a matter of like how much effort it's going to take to do it. We've built far more. I wouldn't say far more. We've built very complex platforms using Stewart. I think the capabilities are there. It may need some adjustments to interfaces or ease of use or some tweaks and things like that. But I think that's the kind of stuff, if we're going to put it in the Tiano core project, that we need to do to improve it overall anyway.
All right, I have to drop. Bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Any other topics? I was going to ask Mike how code reviews are going.
Well, I was gonna table one for next time concerning code coverage. We don't have to talk about it today, but was wondering if anyone had considered enabling code coverage for OVMF using GCC's code coverage capabilities. You can actually do bare metal code coverage without having a standard lib. It would be cool to see that working.
So I'm super interested in that. We have as Mike mentioned earlier, there's well, in Project Mu we do code coverage already of the unit tests, and we have a PR or a change set out on the mailing list has been out there for a couple months now that would bring that to EDK2. It would enable it in both CI and local development scenarios, but that does not cover boot time metrics. And so we have been kind of thinking about that a little bit. I wasn't aware of a solution that already existed off the shelf. So if you know of something that exists, like that would be pretty awesome. Because
I just sent two links that I hadn't been able to verify one of them, but it does. GCC allows you to redirect the coverage into other, non-file based logging systems. So you could log it out to debug Spew instead, which would be useful rather than having it try to write to a file, for example. Or you could write it into a memory region instead. So it would be worth investigating. I'm happy to go do that investigation, but just wondering if anyone else had started to do that at all.
So I'll just say that again, we've been thinking about it. This is exactly kind of what we were thinking was needed. I know of a couple other people that have explored a couple things, but nothing that would be suitable for EDK2. And so I think as far as investments, I'd rather see us land with some sort of open source solution that would work for virtual platforms as well as physical platforms.
Yeah, and I think the solution that at least the link that I provided, would at least allow you to do it on both, but only on physical, only with GCC. I couldn't get, when I tried to get Clang's version to compile, it doesn't seem to support non-standard live, and then Microsoft's compiler also doesn't have the same kind of coverage support, as far as I can tell. So yeah, maybe we can have another discussion about it later, and I'll bring a more formal proposal next time.
Okay, no, that sounds great. I think I have looked at that bottom one, and there's actually a YouTube video that goes along with it, of them describing what they did.
Yeah.
And I think none of them are going to directly apply. We definitely have a lot more challenges in that, you know, we have all these different modules, and we have, you know, especially if you're talking about an Intel system, we have a whole bunch of the boot process that doesn't have real memory available, and we have to transition things. But I think that it does give a pattern that it seems pretty viable. And so, yeah, I would love to see us do that, because I think,
Yeah, I agree. Definitely SEC PEI would be challenging, but you know, coverage for even Dixie or SMM would be great, wouldn't it?
yep,
Oh.
for sure.
Yeah, and then with respect to the modules, if we at least know where the module is loaded into memory, then we can print the currently executing instruction is one option, or we could try to use the code coverage here and built into GCC. So yeah, we should talk about it next time. It's pretty late.
Okay, sounds good.
Cool.
All right, with that, unless anyone else has anything, we'll end for the week. All right, thanks everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Like,
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Sean.
Bye bye.